Welcome back to the Cyber Defense Roundtable. It's sponsored by Hexis Cyber Solutions, and our panelists are Todd Weller with Hexis and journalist Bill Jackson. And we were just about to talk about what organizations can do to better protect themselves, considering all of the threats that we just listed chapter and verse here in our first segment. It seems almost overwhelming. What can organizations do? And historically, what have they done wrong? Can they learn from those mistakes from the past?
First of all, I think they need to spend large amounts of money with vendors and buy everything that comes on the market. But other than that, I think in deciding what they should be doing, it's important to realize that not everything they've done up to this point is wrong. There's an awful lot of technology out there that is not sufficient to defend your enterprise that is still necessary. Antivirus and firewalls get a bad rep because they don't stop everything. On the other hand, if you don't have these basic tools in place, you're going to be so far behind you'll never catch up. And we've produced a lot of technology that does very well at defending our networks. And most of the attacks that enterprises are hit with are defended against. They're stopped. The bad guys are getting better at getting around these things. But it's important to remember that the tools we've got in place now, even though they're not perfect, still work. And there is a good track record of security. We're just not able to keep up with any kind of a static defense. You have to continually be upgrading and changing and adapting.
So I would say that the tools still work, but I would say in a lot of cases they're less effective. Some of that goes to the traditional approach was signature-based, which meant you need to know about an attack. You need to know what it looks like, and then once you know what it looks like, you develop a signature to block it. Well, today's type of attacks, they're unknown. So you need a different type of approach. So what you're seeing customers look at now is more behavior-based detection. Download this file, open it up, let's look at how it behaves to see if there's something bad. So that started out with network. Now we're seeing that on the endpoint. So I do think we're seeing a wave of demand for behavior-based detection on both networks and endpoints. And to be frank, antivirus itself seems to be less effective on known threats. We're hearing catch rates of 30 to 40%, and we're deploying our solution environments. It's amazing the amount of known threats we're finding that organizations are infected with.
Yeah, it's important to realize that just because a threat is known, there are effective countermeasures against it in theory, doesn't mean that people stop using them. That gets a lot of low-hanging fruit. It's cheap and it's easy to throw out existing known threats, and if it gets past some of the defenses, well, that's great. So you can't ignore something just because it's known and there is a defense against it. It's never going to go away.
Do we know if there's an attempt that's failed, that the protective measures have worked?
Yes, that's one of the things that monitoring provides. It lets you get an idea of the threats you're facing, what people are trying to do to you, and when you've blocked it. That usually doesn't get a lot of attention because what you've really got to focus your limited attention on are the threats you don't know and the ones that are liable to get through. And part of the problem is there is only so much money, there is only so much human resources, there is only so much human attention to go around, and you've got to focus that in the right place, which means you can't spend a lot of your time looking at the known threats. You got to block those, forget about them, and be able to focus on the things that are cutting edge.
Yeah, so a couple thoughts come to mind. So one, being able to deal with those known threats efficiently, use automation to block them because you do have scarce resources. So knock out the 98% so your scarce resources can focus on the 2% of threats that matter. Another point I'd make is that there's this interesting religious debate I see out there between prevention and detection and response. Prevention typically means I'm going to be able to block the infection from happening. Detection and response crowd says you're not going to be able to block 100% of everything. But you need to be able to detect when something bad has happened and to stop it before it does damage. So I find it interesting because we are all in the business of preventing breach, preventing the bad thing from
Right.
happening.
Right. That's and that does indicate quite a shift, a complete change in the mindset. But it doesn't have to be one or the other. I mean, if you want to use an example of maybe your own personal health care, you wash your hands, you practice good hygiene, you don't hang out with people who are sick, you don't sneeze on somebody else, that kind of thing. But you can't stop all the intrusions, so you have to be prepared to take care of yourself when you do get sick. Sort of the same thing, yeah?
Well, it's all about risk management.
Okay.
You eliminate what risk you can. Some risk you can eliminate. Some risk it's not practical to eliminate it. It might cost you more to fix a problem than you would suffer if somebody exploited it. So it's not practical. Other things you can't fix. So you fix what you can and what it's practical to fix, and then you make yourself aware of the remaining risk. You do what you can to mitigate that risk, and then you prepare to respond to it if it is exploited. So you can't prevent everything, and you can't have absolute security. The key is to make sure you know what threats and risks you really are facing and how you're going to deal with them.
There's a lot of education that has to come along with being able to do this. You have to know what it is you're looking for and what it is you're doing.
Yeah, some of it's basics, though. Some of it is, as an organization, you should know what IT assets you have, right? You should be able to rank, these are my most critical IT assets. This is where my most critical data resides. And you'd be amazed that a lot of organizations, just some of those basics aren't being done. But I would agree with what Bill said. It'd be great for Hexis if there was unlimited security budget and it was going up. People could just buy everything, but they don't. So they have to prioritize, figure out where the biggest risk is, take care of that, and be willing to accept risk in other areas.
Okay, so financially, that's an issue. Financially, that is an issue, having the money available to be able to get the tools to do this. But it also sounds like there's sort of a mindset, a mental block where you have to shift from that prevention to the detection and the response.
There's an organizational mindset
Okay.
that needs to be, and it is shifting. It is shifting. Before, the IT shop was separate from the security shop. The people that ran the infrastructure were separate from the people who owned the applications and from the people who owned the data that was using the applications. And they didn't work together, and the people in charge of security didn't control the assets that they needed to secure. The people who had the assets were more interested in having them available 100% of the time to anybody who needed them from anywhere, and didn't want security getting in the way and making their lives more difficult. So it's this idea of integrating security with every aspect of your organization's enterprise that really is necessary to make the kind of visibility and risk assessment that's needed.
Two things come to mind here. So one, there's no doubt that at board level of many organizations, cybersecurity is front and center right now. And what's happened is it's moved from becoming kind of an IT risk to a business and operational risk.
Because now there is money involved,
There is-
big money involved.
Right. And
not only money, there are people losing their jobs now. We've seen in the last year a number of chief executives in government and in industry whose careers disappeared when the headlines appeared.
When did you see that shift? When did you see how it changed from being an IT thing to now it's part of the business? Was there any one particular breach or hack or event that really shifted everybody's mindset?
I think it's the confluence of what we've seen in 2014 and 2015. I mean,
see.
I've been around security for almost 20 years, and I've never seen this volume of high-profile attacks. Right?
I would agree. It's been a gradual shift in some ways, but the last 2 years, the high profile of some of these exploits, it's the first time that people have really, high-profile people and chief executive positions have lost their jobs. And I think that is a game changer. When somebody is held accountable at the top, that changes everyone's mindset.
Another important thing that has to happen relates to what Bill talked about is that historically security was an IT risk, and the CISO reported to the CIO.
Sure.
There's a natural conflict there. The CIO wants new applications out quickly. They want them up and running. Security is viewed as a barrier to that. It slows it down. There's a natural conflict to say, hey, boss, your infrastructure is not secure, right? That doesn't go over well. So what you're seeing now, and it's still very early, is the CISO or security function is being moved out of IT, and it's being put under either a chief risk officer, a COO, in some cases a CFO, so that they have a broader view and you alleviate the IT kind of conflict.
The CISO couldn't be their own C-level manager? They have to be under somebody like a CFO?
I mean, I think at this point, you're seeing them put under another C-level. It's not to say that 5 years from now they're not on par with some of those.
It varies a lot from one organization to another, and I think it's going to change. I think, and I'm not sure what role the CISO will or should have as security becomes integrated as it needs to be with every part of the organization. It becomes more difficult to put one person at the executive level and say, you're in charge of security now, when you don't control everything else. So I think the CISO is going to have it's going to be an interesting couple of years, because the very act of integrating security throughout the organization is going to make that a ticklish position to be in.
There's another indication of a different mindset then.
And it's interesting, like at the business and operational risk level, you're seeing the big four providers, the Deloittes of the world, get very aggressive in expanding into cyber because it's becoming a big risk. So they focus a lot on strategy or auditing your financial statements. So I think you're going to see cybersecurity become more of a requirement along those lines.
And the word that I've been hearing is resilience, cyber resilience. What does that mean exactly, and how are people able to incorporate that into their work?
It's part of the realization that you can't stop everything. So if you can't prevent every attack from happening, or you can't stop attack from being successful, you've got to be resilient enough to, in your response to it, to recover from it, so that you can limit the damage that's done. You can respond and clean things up quickly.
It's your cyber immune system.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean you won't get sick, but it's how long are you going to feel the pain?
Yeah, it's along the lines of business continuity, right? You see companies doing disaster recovery exercises. What if something bad happens? Here's my plan to be able to bounce back to keep my business operational. As we saw with an attack like Sony, where that business was shut down for a period of time, you need to realize you're going to be attacked, bad things are going to happen, and in that event, be able to bounce back and get your business back on track.
I didn't realize, and you just said it, and you're absolutely right, this has to be part of a continuity of operations plan. It has to be. Most of the time you think of an attack or a natural disaster where your continuity of operation plan has to go into effect, but now they really have to incorporate cyber. Are you seeing more places do that?
We are. It is. It's to your point. Cybersecurity attacks are a lot easier to carry out than physical attacks. The frequency is increasing. So you're seeing organizations say, here's my plan. This happens. Let's do a simulation. Let's do an exercise and be prepared in this event.
Exactly. Continuity of operations isn't just about hurricanes and earthquakes anymore.
All right, we're going to come right back after this break with more from our Cyber Defense Roundtable. Stay with us.